Daddy, the sink's making that weird noise again. Haley's tiny voice called from the bathroom, her curls bouncing as she peeked around the corner, clutching her stuffed bunny. Finnegan Grant let out a breath, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Of course it is," he muttered, setting down the wrench he'd been using to fix the kitchen faucet. The trailer creaked as he stood, joints stiff from crouching too long on the cracked linoleum. "All right, Hales, let's go see what kind of monster we're dealing with this time." At 34, Finnegan had become a master of duct tape, second-hand tools, and late-night repairs. Raising a 6-year-old alone wasn't easy, but he wouldn't trade it for anything, not even for the life he'd had before his wife left, taking their savings and dreams with her. After coaxing the bathroom sink to stop hissing like an angry cat, Finnegan tucked Haley into bed, kissed her forehead, and returned to the kitchen to sort through the stack of unpaid bills. His phone buzzed on the counter. "Mr. Grant, it's Mel from the hardware store. A lady came in asking for a plumber. I gave her your number." "Thanks, Mel, appreciate it." The number was unfamiliar. He almost didn't call. But with rent due in 3 days and maybe $15 in his wallet, he didn't have the luxury of ignoring work. He dialed. A soft voice answered. "Hi, this is Kaia. I was told you might be able to help with a plumbing issue." "Yeah, I do odd jobs. What's going on?" "My kitchen sink's leaking, badly." Her voice was calm but clipped, like she wasn't used to asking for help. He scribbled down the address and promised to be there by morning. The house wasn't a house, it was a mansion. Finnegan stood at the gate of the massive estate, jaw slack. He double-checked the address. No mistake. The woman who answered the door was barefoot, wearing faded jeans and a loose t-shirt, her dark hair piled into a messy knot. She looked nothing like someone who lived in a place like this. "I'm Kaia," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was soft but certain. "Come in." Finnegan hesitated. "Are you sure you called the right number? I usually work in town. This place is something else." She smiled faintly. "It's the right number." The inside was just as ridiculous: glass walls, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in some designer magazine. But the kitchen was a mess. Water pooled around the sink, soaked towels scattered across the marble floor. "You weren't kidding," he muttered, kneeling to inspect the pipe beneath the sink. "Looks like the seal's shot. I can fix it, but I'll need to run back to my truck." She nodded. "Take your time." While he worked, she hovered nearby, sipping coffee and watching him like he was doing magic. "You do this full-time?" she asked. He looked up. "When I can get the work. I'm a single dad, so I keep it flexible." Her expression softened. "That's a lot." He shrugged. "It's life." When the job was done, he stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "That should hold for now. If it leaks again, call me." She reached for her wallet. "What do I owe you?" "Honestly, whatever you think it's worth. I'm not gonna nickel and dime anyone over a pipe." She blinked at him, surprised. "Most people would." "I'm not most people." Kaia tilted her head. "No, you're not." He packed up his tools and turned to go, but she spoke again. "Wait, would you mind helping me with a few more things around the house? I just moved in. Everything's kind of overwhelming." He paused. "Sure, I've got time this week." "Tomorrow?" she asked, her voice almost hopeful. He nodded. "Tomorrow." Over the next several days, Finnegan returned to the mansion again and again. He fixed a broken curtain rod, installed a new light fixture, and even helped her assemble a bookshelf. Haley came with him once, and Kaia surprised her with a little art set she just had lying around. "You didn't have to do that," Finnegan said as they drove home. "She wanted to paint," Kaia had replied. "I didn't mind." But he noticed it: how Kaia always wore simple clothes, how she never talked about her work, how she avoided questions about where she came from. Still, the way she laughed when Haley made up stories, or how she stayed up late baking banana bread just to give him a slice the next morning, it all felt real. One afternoon, as he finished fixing the railing on her deck, Kaia brought out 2 iced teas and sat beside him. "You work hard," she said, handing him a glass. "Harder than I'd like," he chuckled, "but it keeps us going." She was quiet for a moment. "You're a good dad." "I try." "I mean it." He turned to her, their knees almost touching. "Why'd you really call me that day?" She looked down at her glass. "I could have hired a company, but I didn't want someone who'd upsell me or treat me like a number. Mel said you were honest and kind." "I'm just a guy with a wrench and a kid," he said with a half smile. Kaia's eyes lifted to his. "You're more than that." For a beat, neither of them looked away. It was the first time he let himself wonder what it might feel like to kiss her. But he didn't. He couldn't. 2 nights later, he was back at home, going over Haley's math homework when a knock came at the trailer door. Kaia stood there, holding a small cardboard box. "I found this in the garage, thought she might like it." She handed it to him. Inside was a dollhouse, clearly antique, with working lights and tiny furniture. "Kaia, this is too much." She shook her head. "It was mine when I was a kid. I want her to have it." Haley came running, squealing with delight as she took the box inside. Finnegan stepped out onto the porch with Kaia. "You didn't have to drive all the way out here." "I wanted to." He looked at her, really looked at her. "Who are you, Kaia?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm someone who's falling for you." Kaia's confession echoed in Finnegan's chest long after she drove away. The words had been quiet, almost uncertain, but they landed like thunder. He stood barefoot on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the gravel road until the night swallowed them. Inside, Haley was already dragging the dollhouse into the corner of the living room, humming to herself as she arranged the miniature chairs. Finnegan sat heavily on the couch, dragging a hand down his face. Falling for him? That didn't make sense. Women like her didn't fall for men like him. Her eyes had been steady, though no hesitation, no punchline. He didn't sleep well that night, not from fear he'd faced worse, but from something unfamiliar. Hope, and the danger of it. By morning, he'd convinced himself it was probably a slip, an emotional moment, a kindness misread. Still, when he pulled into her driveway later that afternoon for another job she'd asked him to look at, his heart betrayed him with one hard thump the moment she opened the door. This time, she was dressed in a soft gray sweater and navy slacks, her bare feet tucked into velvet slippers. Her hair was swept down over one shoulder, not piled up like before. "You came," she said, stepping aside. "You asked," he replied, brushing past her into the foyer. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't sure either." She didn't push, just led him through the house to a room he hadn't seen before, a study with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the hills. One of the windows wouldn't close properly, she explained, and the draft was getting worse. He got to work in silence, examining the frame, keeping his hands busy so his thoughts wouldn't wander. She lingered by the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "I told my sister about you." That made him pause. "She said I was playing with fire," Kaia continued. "She thinks I'm reckless, that I get attached too easily." He glanced over his shoulder. "And are you?" "I don't know anymore. I used to be sure of everything, then I moved here." "You moved here to get away from something." "I moved here because I inherited the house, and it came with too many memories and not enough peace." That was new. He stood and leaned against the wall, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Inherit from who?" "My father. He passed away last year. This was his private estate. No one even knew he had it except me and the lawyers." Finnegan's brow furrowed. So this place, it wasn't something you bought recently. I've never bought anything for myself, not really. Everything I have came from him, which is part of the problem. He crossed his arms. You said you wanted help around the house, but this is more than a leaky sink and a broken window, isn't it? Kaia met his gaze. I didn't know how to ask for something I actually need. What's that? Someone who sees me, not the money, not the house, just me. He didn't know how to answer that not right away, but something in her voice rang true, and not the kind of polished truth you rehearse to get what you want, the kind that hurt to say out loud. I see you, he said finally. That's the problem. Her eyes flickered. Why's that a problem? Because I've got a daughter who paints pictures of houses we'll probably never live in. Because I fix things for people who don't remember my name the next day. Because I can't afford to dream about someone like you. The air between them tightened. Kaia stepped forward, her fingers wrapping around the back of a chair. I didn't ask you to dream. I just wanted you to stay a little longer. He looked at her then, really looked. Past the clothes, past the house, past the quiet elegance that clung to her like a second skin. She looked tired, but not in the way that sleep could fix. In the way that came from carrying too many burdens alone. I'll be here tomorrow, he said, quieter now. Haley's got school in the morning. I'll drop her off and come by. Kaia nodded, her lips parting like she wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. When he left, she didn't walk him out, but her eyes stayed on him until the door shut. The next day, Kaia was waiting on the front steps before he even parked. This time, her hair was loose and windblown, and she carried 2 travel mugs. I made coffee, she said, handing him one. Thanks, he said, taking the cup. What's on the agenda today? She hesitated. Actually, I was hoping you'd come with me somewhere. Where? It's a bit of a drive, but I think you'll understand once we get there. He eyed her warily. I've got 4 hours before I need to pick up Haley. That's enough. They drove in her car, a sleek black sedan with leather seats that smelled like cedar and vanilla. She didn't play music, just stared out the window as the city faded into rolling hills. Eventually, they pulled up to a gated lot. A man in a uniform stepped out of a booth and opened the gate without a word. What is this place? Finnegan asked as they drove through. Kaia parked and got out. Come on, I want to show you something. She led him through a narrow garden path, then stopped before a small headstone nestled beneath a willow tree. The plaque read, Victor Alcott, beloved father, complicated man. Finnegan stood still, Alcott as in. Kaia nodded. He built half of the West Coast's tech infrastructure, owned companies in 5 countries. No one knew about this place. It was his retreat, and now it's mine. He looked over at her, then yours. A millionaire, she said plainly, several times over. Finnegan took a step back, the weight of the truth settling in his chest like a stone. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know you weren't here for that. He didn't speak. Kaia turned to him, her voice steadier now. I'm not ashamed of where I come from, but it's lonely when everyone sees the number before the name. You were the first person who looked me in the eye and asked who I was. Finnegan's jaw tightened. And what now? You think because I fixed your pipes and didn't ask questions, I'm the safe choice? No, she said, stepping closer. I think you're the only honest thing I've had in a long time. The wind rustled the leaves above them. A bird chirped somewhere in the branches. Finnegan could feel the earth beneath his boots, solid and unmoving. Real. Kaia was watching him like she wanted permission to breathe. He met her gaze. I don't know what any of this means yet. That's okay, she said softly. I'm not asking for guarantees, just maybe, a beginning. He looked down at the stone, then back at her. All right, he murmured. Let's start there. Finnegan sat in his truck the next morning, staring at the steering wheel long enough for Haley to notice. Are we late? She asked, swinging her legs in the passenger seat, her backpack clutched to her chest. No, he said, clearing his throat, just thinking. About her. He blinked. Who? The lady with the big house, Kaia. Haley said it like it was obvious. He gave her a look. What makes you say that? She always looks at you like she likes your face, even when it's dirty. He laughed despite himself, shaking his head. You're too observant. Haley grinned. You're welcome. After dropping her off at school, he drove to the estate, unsure what he'd find. But Kaia was already outside, crouched near the garden beds with her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her knees. She didn't look up right away. Ever planted anything before? She asked as he approached. Tomatoes, once. They didn't survive a week. She stood, brushing soil from her hands. I ordered too many bulbs, thought maybe you could help plant them. He took the small shovel she offered and knelt beside her. For a long stretch, they worked in silence. The sun was warm, birds chirped somewhere in the hedges, and the scent of earth clung to the air. It was the kind of peace he didn't realize he'd missed. Kaia finally sat back on her heels. I spoke to the board this morning. He glanced over, bored. For the Alcott Foundation, she said, wiping her forehead. I'm stepping down as chairwoman. He straightened. Why? Because don't want to run a machine anymore. I want to build something real. I've spent most of my adult life managing people who only saw me as a means to an end. I don't want that to be the rest of my story. So what's next? I'm turning the estate into a creative retreat for kids who have lost a parent, she said quietly. Art, music, writing. A place they can stay for a while and just breathe. He was silent, the weight of that settling into his chest. My mother died when I was 5, she said, her voice softer now. My father never let me talk about it. He thought grief was inefficient. Finnegan looked at her, a new understanding unfolding behind his eyes. That why you gave Haley the art set? She nodded. He dug the shovel into the earth again, more carefully this time. You're not who I thought you were. Kaia tilted her head. Who did you think I was? Someone trying to hide, but maybe you're just trying to start over. She smiled faintly. That's fair. They planted in silence again, until the sun crept higher, and the newly dug soil shimmered under its warmth. Later, she brought out water, and they sat on the garden steps. I've been thinking, she said, glancing sideways. Maybe you could help with the retreat. You're good with your hands and kids like you. Haley loves you. It'd be part-time, just while we get things running. Finnegan stared at the glass in his hands. I'm not used to people offering me jobs without a resume. I don't need a resume to know who you are. He let out a slow breath. What if I say yes and it goes sideways? What if we ruin the good thing we've started? Then we face it together. He looked at her, and for the first time, the idea of letting someone else carry part of the weight didn't feel like weakness. It felt like relief. All right, he said, I'll help. Kaia's hand brushed his, tentative but deliberate. He didn't pull away. She turned her face to his. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why haven't you kissed me? He blinked, caught off guard. Because I wasn't sure you wanted me to. I told you I was falling for you. You also have a 10-bedroom mansion, and a last name that opens doors mine never will. Kaia's voice dropped. I don't care about doors. I care about what's real. He leaned in slowly, eyes never leaving hers. So do I. When their lips met, it wasn't polished or perfect. It was warm, hesitant, and entirely new. She exhaled softly against him, one hand settling against his chest. He stayed there, grounded in the moment, the taste of her, the scent of lavender and sun-warmed skin. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to rush this," she whispered. "So I'm not going anywhere," he replied. That evening, he returned to the trailer to find Haley drawing on the floor, crayons scattered around her like petals. "Did you kiss her?" she asked without looking up. Finnegan blinked. "What?" "You smell like her shampoo." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're impossible." Haley grinned. "I knew it." He tucked her in that night with a little more stillness in his heart, the kind that came from the first steps of something permanent. The following week, Kaia introduced him to the architects she'd hired for the retreat. They met in the sunroom, sketches spread across a long table. Finnegan asked questions, pointed out practical concerns, and offered solutions none of them had considered. Kaia watched him with unmistakable pride. After the meeting, she walked him out to the car. "You're a natural," she said. "I just know how to keep things from falling apart." She touched his arm. "That's exactly what we need." Before he left, she handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" "Advance on your first paycheck, for you and Haley." He opened it, eyebrows lifting. "Kaia, this is more than generous." "It's fair, and it's only the beginning." He nodded, closing the door behind him, and drove off with the envelope on the seat beside him and a new kind of weight in his chest, the kind that felt like possibility. The morning sun poured through the windows of the newly renovated guest house, casting golden light across the polished oak floors. Finnegan tightened the last cabinet hinge in the kitchenette while Kaia stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching with quiet focus. "You measure everything by hand?" she asked. "Always," he said, tapping the level against the edge of the frame. "Technology doesn't know if the wall's crooked." She stepped inside, brushing her palm along the smooth countertop. "The kids are going to love this place." "They'll have everything they need here," he said. "It's a good foundation." Kaia glanced toward the open French doors, where Haley sat on the grass painting a mural on a long wooden panel with two other children siblings from a nearby shelter Kaia had invited to test the program. "She's happier here." "She's safe here," Finnegan said, standing. "That's not a small thing." Kaia turned to him, her voice softer. "I've been thinking about something." He wiped his hands on a rag. "What's that?" "There's a guest speaker coming to the Foundation's gala next weekend. It's more of a farewell event now, since I'm stepping away." She hesitated. "I want you there." He raised an eyebrow. "Me, at a gala?" "I'll make sure you don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to," she said. "But I'd like them to see what real strength looks like." He studied her for a beat. "I don't own a tux." "Already taken care of. It's hanging in your closet at the cabin." He blinked. "You're serious?" "I might have guessed your measurements the first week we met." He narrowed his eyes at her. "That's either really thoughtful or slightly unsettling." She laughed, and for a moment the air felt lighter. "Try it on before you judge me." When he arrived at the gala, he barely recognized the man in the mirror. The tailored black suit fit like it had been made for him, and the white shirt beneath it was crisp, collar sharp. Haley, staying overnight with a neighbor friend for the first time, had insisted he wear the silver watch she'd made from string and beads. Kaia met him just past the grand staircase of the downtown ballroom. Her gown was graphite gray, sleek and simple, a departure from the softness he was used to seeing her in. She looked more like a CEO than a hostess tonight, poised and quiet, her hair pulled into a low knot at the base of her neck. "You clean up well," she said, her voice just above the music. "I feel like a chandelier in a hardware store," he muttered. "Then you're the most needed thing in the room." She guided him through the crowd with a hand on his arm, introducing him briefly to board members and donors, never lingering too long. He noticed how they looked at her, some with admiration, others with envy, but she never flinched, never performed. When she spoke, she did it with calm certainty. During dinner, she leaned closer. "I've never brought someone with me to one of these." He looked at her, fork paused. "Not once." Never felt like, had someone who belonged in both worlds. "And now I do." After the speeches and the auction, Kaia took the stage. The microphone crackled softly before her voice filled the room. "For years, I've tried to honor my father's legacy," she said. "But legacy is not about money. It's about what you choose to build with what you've been given. I'm stepping back to start something new, something that serves hearts, not headlines." Finnegan watched her, heart beating hard as the room erupted into applause. She stood there composed, but her eyes found his in the crowd just for a second, and something passed between them. Not a performance, not a show, just truth. After the gala, they walked the length of the empty ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "You were right to say what you did," he said. "They needed to hear it." "I needed to say it," she replied. "I've spent most of my life trying to be enough for everyone else. I'm done with that." He reached for her hand. "So what now?" She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Now we build something that lasts." They returned to the estate that night, and for the first time, he didn't park by the guest house. He followed her into the main house, where candlelight flickered across the hallway and music played softly from a speaker tucked into a corner. She led him to the sunroom, where a table was set for two, a simple meal waiting. No servers, no staff, just them. "I made dinner," she said, a little breathless. "You cooked?" he asked, incredulous. "I followed a recipe, technically." They ate, laughing when the sauce was too spicy and the bread slightly burned. He poured the wine, and she lit more candles, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt like they were pretending to be anything they weren't. Afterward, they stood by the window, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder. "I was afraid," she said suddenly, "of falling, of trusting the wrong person again." "So was I," he said. "But then you showed up with a wrench and didn't run when the sink exploded." He kissed her temple, "Pretty sure that sink saved my life." She turned to face him, her hands pressed against his chest. "I want you here, not just for the retreat, for everything." He brushed her cheek with his thumb. "I'm not walking away." Her eyes glistened, but not from sadness, from clarity. 6 months later, the retreat opened its doors to its first full group of children. Finnegan ran the workshops and managed the grounds, always with Haley at his side. Kaia focused on the creative curriculum, her days filled with paint, laughter, and the kind of chaos that felt like joy. On a quiet spring evening, she stood beneath the arbor at the back of the property, dressed in a simple ivory gown. Flowers tangled above her, and fairy lights blinked among the trees. Finnegan stood in front of her, wearing the same suit she'd once placed in his closet. Haley stood beside him, proudly holding a ring box. When Kaia said, "I do," she didn't just promise him a future, she promised him a home. And when he said it back, he wasn't just answering her. He was answering every question he'd ever asked himself about whether he'd ever be enough. Together, they built a life neither of them had expected, but one they both deserved. One rooted in truth, grown from pain, and blooming with love. Forever this time. The attic above the main house creaked softly as Kaia pushed open the narrow door, dust swirling in the shaft of light from the single round window. Finnegan followed her up the narrow steps, ducking slightly under the low beam as he stepped inside. "You sure you want to tackle this today?" he asked, glancing at the towering stacks of boxes and covered furniture. "I've been putting it off for too long," she said, pulling the sheet off a trunk near the wall. "It's time." He didn't ask what was in them. He could tell by the way her hands moved over the worn leather lid that this wasn't just clutter, it was history. Kaia unlatched the trunk and lifted the lid slowly. Inside were old photo albums, worn notebooks, and a collection of letters tied with a pale blue ribbon. She pulled one free and unfolded it carefully. "My father used to write me letters before the company took over his life," she said. "He never mailed them, just kept them in here." Finnegan crouched beside her, silent. "This one's from when turned 10. He said he regretted missing my recital and promised he'd be there next year." She traced the ink with her finger. "He didn't come the year after either." "You kept all of them?" he asked. "I didn't know they existed until after he died. Found them buried under financial reports and stock evaluations." She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He wrote more as he got older. Maybe he thought I'd understand him better when it was too late to explain in person." Finnegan rested his hand on hers. "You don't have to carry all that alone anymore." Kaia turned to him, her gaze steady. "I'm not asking you to fix it. Just want you to be here while I sort through it." He nodded, "Then I'll sit right here." They spent the rest of the afternoon sifting through memories, some bittersweet, others surprising. Kaia found a sketchbook filled with pencil drawings of her as a child, drawn by her father's hand. She stared at one for a long time, then handed it to Finnegan. "I always thought he never noticed me, but he saw more than I realized." Finnegan studied the drawing. "He captured your expression exactly. This is how you look when you're trying not to let someone see you're hurting." Kaia blinked quickly, then exhaled. "I think I'm finally ready to forgive him." They packed the letters carefully into a new box, labeled it "Keep," and left the rest behind. Downstairs, the retreat was buzzing with quiet activity. A poetry circle had gathered beneath the maple trees, and laughter filtered through the kitchen window where one of the volunteers was teaching a baking lesson. Kaia paused at the staircase and looked over the railing. "It's starting to feel like a home." Finnegan leaned beside her. "You built it to be one." She turned toward him. "And you filled it with life." That night, as they tucked Haley into her loft bed in the guest house, she held up her newest painting, a bright, swirling canvas of the estate's garden, complete with fairy lights and stars. "I want to hang this in the big house," she said. Kaia smiled. "Then we'll find the perfect spot." Once Haley drifted off, Finnegan poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Kaia by the fireplace in the main house. The flames crackled softly, casting gold across her skin. "I've never asked," she said, curling her legs beneath her. "Do you ever miss your old life before all this?" He looked into the fire. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, but not the struggle." She watched him, quiet for a moment. "I used to think love had to look a certain way, polished, predictable, but I was wrong." "Love's never predictable," he said, meeting her eyes, "but it should feel like home." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then you're mine." Spring gave way to summer and the retreat grew. More children arrived, more programs launched. Word spread, and soon there were wait lists and donors and a growing team. But the heart of it remained unchanged. It was still a place built on healing, on truth, on the kind of love that didn't need to shout to be heard. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Kaia stood barefoot on the grass, watching Haley teach a younger boy how to tie-dye a t-shirt. Finnegan walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I got a call today," he said softly. "That carpentry apprenticeship I applied for years ago, they want me to teach a course here." Kaia turned to face him, eyes wide. "You're going to do it, right?" He nodded. "If you'll help me figure out the lesson plans." She laughed. "Only if I get to be your assistant." He kissed her, slow and certain. "Deal." Later that week, they hosted a dinner under the canopy of trees, long wooden tables covered in lanterns, fresh bread, and wildflowers picked from the garden. Children sat beside volunteers, artists beside builders, and laughter filled the air like music. Kaia stood to make a toast. This place only exists because of the people who believed in something better. You all made this real. And to the man who saw beauty in broken things, thank you for showing us how to build again. As the guests raised their glasses, Finnegan reached for her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. When the evening ended and the last lantern was dimmed, Kaia and Finnegan walked the grounds, barefoot and quiet. They stopped beneath the arbor, the same place they'd exchanged vows months earlier. Kaia looked up at the stars. You know what I want next. What? Noise, chaos, mornings that start too early and nights that end with toy trains under the bed. He turned to her slowly. You mean? She nodded. I went to the doctor today. We're going to need a bigger art room. Finnegan's breath caught, then broke into a full, stunned smile. He swept her into his arms, spinning her gently before setting her down with reverence. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, the night soft around them. In the months that followed, the retreat grew in ways they had never imagined. A second building was added. A scholarship program launched. Haley started writing her own stories and reading them aloud during group time. Kaia's pregnancy brought a new rhythm to the house, slower in some ways, more vibrant in others. On a warm afternoon, Finnegan built a wooden cradle by hand while Kaia painted the nursery walls in soft, calming colors. They worked in tandem, no need for words. When their daughter was born, they named her Iris for hope that blooms even after the coldest winter. They raised her in a home filled with color, warmth, and voices that never went unheard. And in the years that followed, whenever someone asked Kaia how it all began, she always said the same thing. With a broken pipe, a stubborn man, and a truth that changed everything. They didn't need chandeliers or private jets. They had love, laughter, and a life built on something stronger than money. They had each other. And that was more than enough.